Hey everyone, welcome in. It's me, the Travel Bee, and I'm going to share a little bit about our trip to Scotland, which is a pretty cool 3 week trip that we took very recently in an RV. So, this section just shows you the route that we took, going just outside of Glasgow to a few different centers and museums, which was a great start. We even slept at a wind farm, which was pretty cool. And then we headed up towards the Isle of Skye. We stopped in Loch Lomond to the ferry trail and also in Oban and Glencoe. We did some Harry Potter stuff, like that was Hagrid's hut in that photo. We went to the Glenfinnan Viaduct and then continued our way to the Isle of Skye. So that was a pretty neat highlight. We saw everything from waterfalls to the Fairy Glen. We also saw a ferry bridge, and there's a lot of things called ferry on Isle of Skye, including the ferry pools right there. So it was a pretty awesome section. We continued on to Loch Ness and also went to see several cairns, which was very interesting. And then we did the NC 500, so a pretty huge section right along the coast. We stopped at several ruins, had some amazing sights, and then we also went to a whole bunch of beaches. One of my highlights was seeing all the hairy coos around, which was pretty cool. And then we got to John O'Groats and continued along the coast, which was very windy, and was a really cool part of the trip. So next up, we decided to keep going to some of the national park areas, and that was a huge highlight as well. We made it to Balmoral Castle, and then we continued our way along to several different ruins up in this section of the northeast of Scotland, which was very interesting. So we finished sort of circling back. We had our RV for 3 weeks. We went to a few tower houses, visited several communities, passed the Kelpies on our way toward Edinburgh, as well as Stirling, the Wallace Monument. And then we went to Scone Palace, which was pretty interesting. And we decided we loved Glencoe so much that we went back to Glencoe for a little trip and an overnight, and then headed back into Edinburgh to sort of finish up our tour. But first, we went to a farm where Mike did several hikes with the kids, which was really fun. We finished up in Edinburgh, and then we went to a hotel there before leaving. So that was the path we took in Scotland. And so I'm just going to share a little bit more about the story. And this is the kids at the airport before we left. They did not know we were going on a trip. So it was pretty cool. When we made it here, we were in the RV, and the kids didn't actually realize we were taking a trip to Scotland. So that was a pretty cool surprise. We were super tired from the overnight flight with the 3 kids, but we went to the Scottish Owl Center anyway, and it was really cool. This is that wind farm called Whiteley, where we stayed overnight with our RV, and it was a pretty cool random spot that we discovered. We use an app to help us find places to stay. And this is as we continued on the Harry Potter part of the tour. I talked a little bit about going to the viaduct, which was pretty cool. We walked in there. The midges were pretty bad in this section, so there were like quite a few midges because it was not a windy day. But that's okay. We continued on and eventually made it to the Isle of Skye, which was a really big highlight. And I will say that some of the best scenery that we saw on the whole trip was in this section on the Isle of Skye. And I, in particular, really love the Fairy Glen with this huge sort of area that you can walk up to. The kids went all the way to the top of it, and we saw sheep everywhere, which was really cool. This is one of the little sheep that we saw. And the other part was the sunsets on the Isle of Skye were just incredible from the RV. They really were a highlight. But we managed to go to a few castles as well while we were touring, and the kids really enjoyed that. And that was a big part of the trip for us, was just touring around and also getting out into nature, like the fairy pools, which was another area that was super crowded but very organized in terms of how to park. Really enjoyed that. Able to get out and really explore. Loch Ness was another place that we wanted to visit. We did that, and then we continued on to head to the NC 500. That was a pretty long stretch that we did the NC 500, and there were some cool ruins that we were able to stop at along the way. I thought that was just a really big highlight, to be driving somewhere and just stop at ruins as we went. So that was fun, and the amount of beaches and things like that that we saw along the NC 500. It was so windy. I could not believe how windy it was everywhere we went. The beaches, of course, it was all coastal, so it was very windy. We saw some cool lighthouses. In this section here, we even saw puffins. That was pretty cool. But then we headed back towards sort of the central part. I mentioned before about Balmoral Castle. That was a really big highlight, to be able to see the castle and the gardens. The grounds were just so beautiful. There were really so many amazing buildings. We went to as part of the Scottish National Trust. So we became members of that organization, and we went to a whole bunch of towers and different buildings, as much as we could, to really enjoy the experience of some of the Scottish history. And we couldn't miss the Kelpies because we drove right past them and they were gigantic. And so we decided we had to stop. So we made that stop as well. Another cool place was Scone Palace, and it was a really cool palace to go to and to visit. So I'm really happy we made that stop before going down to the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. And there was lots of cool stuff, like the inspiration for Diagon Alley was supposedly in this area. And we saw so many of the churches and buildings as well. So just a really amazing trip to Scotland with the family. I really enjoyed all the scenery. I could go into detail about each one of these places, and so I probably will do some more detailed videos, but that just gives you a flavor for our exploration. Thanks for watching. And as always, may you see the world and love it.